I'm going to come down here, hold the control key, and click on the first 1841 router. I'm going to drop these three routers together. Now everybody has their own unique method when it comes to setting up their logic topologies. What I like to do, instead of coming up and down from the logical workspace to my tool palette, is I know according to my handout I need three routers. So I'm going to hold the control key, click on this router, and then drop three of them. Then I'm done with those. Then what I'm going to do is come down here, click on the switches, because I know that I need to have a switch for each of my local area networks. So I need three switches. So I'm going to hold the control key and click on the very first switch. And I'm going to drop one next to each router. And of course I need some end devices to be able to test this. Now I only ask you guys to add 2 end devices per each local area network. So once again I'm going to come down to my tool palette, click on an end device icon, and then I'm going to hold the control key, and I'm going to click on the very first generic end device. And this time I'm going to drop 2 for each of my local area networks. And I'm just going to work like this in a counterclockwise fashion. After I get done dropping my end devices, I'm going to hit the escape key, and now I need to connect them all together. So I'm going to focus on the LANs first before I get into the WANs. So the way I'm going to accomplish that is I'm going to come down to the lightning bolt, and I'm going to click on the straight through cable, but I'm going to hold the control key before I click on that cable. And then I'm going to click on router 0. I'm going to choose the FA0/0. In this particular lab I don't care which one you guys click on, but just as long as that the router is connected to the local area network. And when I click on the switch, I always need to think management while I'm doing all this. So I'm going to come all the way down to the port 24 of the switch. And the reason why I'm doing that is because when I look at the switch in the physical world, my last port I'm going to use to represent my gateway, my way out of my network. And I'm going to follow that same technique for PC0. So I'm going to click on PC0, click on Fast Ethernet, and then I'm going to click on the very first port of my switch, which is going to be my Fast Ethernet 0/1. And then I'm going to do the same thing for PC1, click on the Fast Ethernet, and then I'm going to click on the switch, and then I'm going to click on Fast Ethernet 2. And I'm going to go to my other LAN, my other subnet, click on the router, click on Fast Ethernet 0/0, come down to the switch, click on port 24, go to the other PC, PC2, click on Fast Ethernet, click on the switch, and choose Fast Ethernet 1. And then I'm going to end up at PC3, Fast Ethernet, and then I'm going to click on the switch and choose Fast Ethernet 0/2. So that allows me to have those 2 subnets hardwired together. And now I'm going to go up to the last subnet, subnet 3, for my local area network. Click on router 2. Click on Fast Ethernet 0/0. Come to the switch and click on Fast Ethernet 0/24. Remember, it could be any port on the switch. I just choose to use the /24 because of physical management, cable management, if you will. I'm going to click on PC4, Fast Ethernet, go up to switch 2, and click on Fast Ethernet 0/1. And then I'm going to finish this off by clicking on PC5 and going to the switch. Now I have my local area networks wired or cabled up. I need to go to my routers, and I need to add my serial cable. In order to add a serial cable to my routers, I need to have a serial card. So to do that, I'm going to hit the escape key, click on router 0. I'm going to turn off my router. I'm going to come over on the left side and click on the WIC-2T. So I'm going to choose this because this has 2 serial ports, and I need both of those serial interfaces to be able to connect to the other routers because I have redundancy going on. So I'm going to click on that, come down here to the lower right corner, and drag this card into the first slot, slot 0, and turn it on. I'm going to do that for the other 2 routers. I'm going to click on R1, turn it off, click on WIC-2T, grab that and drop it into the router, and then turn it on. Close out of that. Come up to R2. Turn it off. Click on WIC-2. Drag this up into the slot 0 and turn it back on. Now that I did that, I can actually add my serial interface, my serial cables between these routers. Now remember the way we're going to be doing this. I'm going to make this be the DC end of this router. I'm going to let this be the DC end for this WAN, and I'm going to let this be the DC for that one. I'm just doing it because that's the way I wanted to do it. As long as no LAN has two clocks being set up, because that's the DC helps us to identify. The DC basically tells us which is the clocks and which aren't. Okay? So let me go and add my interfaces. Knowing this, I'm going to go to the serial cable, hold the control key, click on the serial cable, the little red zig with the clock symbol. Then I'm going to come up to router 0. And I told you guys before you began this exercise that I want the serial 0/0/0 interface of each router to be the DCE. So this is the very first interface I have to click on, because when I choose the cable with the clock on it, I have to make sure the very first interface I click on my router is the interface that's going to be the DCE, the one that's going to set the clock rate. Now I'm going to click on router 2, but this time when I click on router 2, I'm not going to choose serial 0/0/0, but rather serial 0/0/1, right? Why am I choosing the serial 1 and not the serial 0? What is the serial 0 going to represent, guys? This serial 0 is going to represent this network right here because it's the DCE for this router, correct? And it's just a classic example that you don't have to plug in serial 0 to another interface card called serial 0. A serial card is a serial card. Serial interfaces are serial interfaces, and you can mix and match them as long as they're the right cable type, right interface type. So I click on R2, 0/0, come down to R1, and this one I'm going to pick serial 0/0/1. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on R1. This is going to be my DCE. So I'm going to click on serial 0/0/0, and then I'm going to click on R0 and click on 0/0/1. Order matters. I have now just specified that this is my DCE, this is my DCE, and this is my DCE. Do you see that each of these networks have their own DCE? So when I start configuring these routers, which I'm going to do in a second, I'm going to turn the clock rate on for that one, but turn it off for this interface. All right? So let me hit the escape key. And the very first device I set up on my network is going to be my gateway. So I'm going to click on router 0. I'm going to click on the config tab. I'm going to come over here to the left, and I'm going to click on my fast Ethernet 0/0. This is my gateway. This is the side that's being plugged into my local area network, in this case subnet 1. I'm going to turn it on. I told you guys last week how to memorize that. I'm going to come down here to IP address. And this is interesting. I'm in subnet 1 now, right? And I need to configure this router so now that it's part of the same thing so I don't prevent overlapping. Because when you get in the classful environment, you introduced a new way of causing problems, if you will. So I have this one entire address block of 256 addresses that I'm dividing up, it looks like randomly. But when you look at the binary, there's some order to it. And because I'm dividing it up, I could introduce overlapping. So let me type in 192.168.1, but I'm left with a dilemma. Originally, if I was using a whole classful address, I'd be typing in 254 at this given moment, right? But I'm not typing in 254 because I don't go all the way up to the end of the octet. And subnet 1, where do I end at? My broadcast address ends at 95 because 96 represents subnet 2, correct? So 95 is my broadcast address, so what's the number before 95? 94, right? That's my last usable, And I like to assign my last usable address my router or my gateway. Ian, question? Share with the class, because this is going to happen. This happened in my last class. It's going to happen to people out on the internet.
Having issues configuring the serial, the WANs network.
Okay, what does it say for you when you try to do it?
I was trying to set up the serial. I already have 0/0/0/0. I was trying to.
All right, so let me catch up with you. So let me finish configuring this one. Were you able to configure your LANs, or you haven't got to that point? Okay, so what did you put in for your subnet mask for this subnet? So this is subnet 1.
It's the router.
Yep, I'm configuring the router. So what did you put for your IP address?
192.
192. Yep. Wait. We're in subnet 1. Because everything is now being related. If you make a mistake in one subnet, it's going to cause problems for your other subnets. Because things are trying to be in order, right? Subnet 0 up here, subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3. So what I need to put in the address of 192.168.1 dot something that belongs to subnet 1. I picked the last usable, which was 94. Then for my subnet mask, I put in 255.255.255.224. Okay? I'm happy with that. But now you're saying you're having a problem between here and here?
Yeah.
All right. So this is your serial 0/0/0. And then this one over here is your serial 0/0/1.
Actually, it's between the other two.
Okay, so it's between subnet 0 and subnet 1. So it's this subnet right here, which is subnet 5, correct?
Yes.
Because we're making this one 3, this one 4, and this one 5. Okay? So what I'm going to do is how did we configure router 0? So let me click on router 0. And remember, this is going to be your 0/0/1 interface, correct? So we're going to click on R0, so router 0. Now I'm going to go to config tab, and I'm going to click on my serial 0/0/1. What did you do to configure it? Did you turn it on first?
Turn it on.
Good.
I said not set for the clock rate.
Very good, because it's not the DCE. So we're going to turn this off because this side of the router is not responsible for the clock. What did you do for your IP address?
That's where I had issues.
Okay. Since this is going to be subnet 5, what we're going to do is we're going to go look at a chart, and we know that subnet 5 begins at 192.168.1.121 for the network address, right? So what's the first usable address for subnet 5? 121. I could put that right here, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to type in 192.168.1.121. Now I'm going to click on the subnet mask, and it took a guess because this router's fast Ethernet was configured to be 224. But is that the right subnet mask for this network? What should the subnet mask be for this serial network? Now remember, for those that are watching this at home, I went out of order to fix a problem. So I'm trying to fix my subnet 5 problem. What should it be for a subnet, for a WAN? What should the subnet mask be? It's a /30, right, folks? So I'm leaving the last 2 bits for the host, and I'm borrowing 6 bits. Well, if I'm leaving the last 2, what 2 bits am I leaving? 2 and 1, right? 2 plus 1 gives me 3. What's 255 minus 3? 252, right? And you can see it over on the chart. Subnet 3 subnet's mask is 255.255.255.252. That's the same for subnet 4, and it's going to be the same for subnet 5. So let me put in a 252 here. And let me close out of this. Since I'm configuring this, since I'm configuring this interface right here, the serial 0/0/1 of router 0, I'm going to come down here and configure router serial 0/0/0 because that's this interface that's being connected to router 0. So Ian, let's do that together. Let me click on R1. Let me click on the config tab. Let me click on serial 0/0/0, and help me out. How are we going to configure this?
We have the 192.
I'm going to turn it on, right?
Right.
And I'm going to leave the clock rate at like the 2 million because this is the DCE. This one needs to send out the pulse. So what are you going to do for the IP address?
92.168.1.16.
Oh, wait a minute, wait a minute.
16, or is this the...
Be careful. This interface belongs to subnet 5, just like the other interface. Router 0, let me minimize this to show you. It's yelling at me because I got to configure it, but router 0 and router 1 connect together here. These two interfaces need to be part of the same logical network, correct? What is the network address, Ian, for this subnet between here and here? What's the network address?
192.168.1.120.
120, correct. And I gave this interface .121. Good with that? So what should I make this interface to be part of the same logical network?
122.
122, and that's the last one I could use. So now let me click on router 1. Let me come over to the config tab, go back to serial 0/0/0, and click on IP address and type in 192.168.1.122. What am I going to put in for the subnet mask? What did I put for the other mask? Oh, for the other interface?
Forget, because it actually yelled at me for putting it in. So, but it was
if it yelled at you, it's an overlap issue. Should be 252. So I'm going to put in all the 5 to 255s, then a 252 at the end. If it yelled at you because you had an overlap because some other subnet had the wrong subnet mask.
Or because I actually typed it in.
Typed it in wrong? Okay, that works too. Or it doesn't work. But 255.255.255.252 is what I'm going to put in here. I'm going to close out of this one. It seems like that seems to be the problem child for my networks, is that setting up these WANs are dependent on setting up the LANs, correct? And you have to make sure you use the right subnet mask for each of these. So I'm going to go back to continuing configuring my local area network 1, which was subnet 1. So I'm going to go to PC 0, and I'm going to go to the desktop tab, and I'm going to click on IP config. And I'm going to type in for an IP address of 192.168.1.65 because this is the first usable address for subnet 1. Now I'm going to click on the subnet mask, and I'm going to replace that last 0 with a 224 because that's the subnet mask for subnet 1. And then for the default gateway, I'm going to put in a 192.168.1.94 because that's what I configured router 0's fast Ethernet interface to be. I'm going to do this to the other PC on the same network. So PC 1, desktop tab, IP config, and I'm going to type in 192.168.1.66 because the last one was 65. Subnet mask is going to be 224 at the end. So it's 255.255.255.224.
Is it okay if I use 66 and
That's fine.
67? Okay.
Yep, as long as it's within the same range. 192.168.1. What am I going to put in here, Evan? 94. This one is conditional. You can't say, is it all right if I made this one 74? It depends on what you configured your router to be, right? I configured my router's fast Ethernet to be 192.168.1.94. So I have to use that one for the gateway. All right, now I'm going to go back to subnet 0, which is the one I should have done first, but I just want to show you guys, it doesn't matter which one you configure first as long as you're using the right information. This is really critical. Configuring devices are simple, but using the right information is where the challenge begins. So I'm going to click on R1. I'm going to click on config and click on fast Ethernet 0/0 because that's what represents my local area network. I'm going to turn this port on. And where it says IP address, I'm going to type in 192.168.1. What do you think I'm going to use? Brian, what did you use for this network? Subnet 0. So I'm on the very bottom, the one with 60 hosts. 60.
80.62.
62, very good, because that's the last usable one for that range, because subnet 0 goes from 0 to 63, right? So I'm using dot 62, and what did you put in for your subnet mask? Because 252 is not right. Dot 192, correct. Because this one needed 64 hosts, so a dot 192 at the end of a subnet mask gives me 64 hosts. So I'm going to close out of that. And then now I'm going to come down here and configure my PCs. So PC2, I'm going to go to desktop, click on IP config, and I'm going to type in 192.168.1.1 because this is the first PC of the first subnet, subnet 0. And I'm going to change the subnet mask to be 192 at the very end. And what am I going to put in for my default gateway? Brian, what did you put in for your default gateway? I configured router 1's fast Ethernet to be the last usable address for the subnet. Since it's my router, I make that my default gateway. So what is my last usable address for this block? It's going to be 62 is going to be my last usable. That's what I made my router. That's what I have to use for my computers to know what the gateway is. So I'm going to close out of that. I'm going to go to PC3, configure the same similar information, I should say, 192.168.1.2, subnet mask of 255.255.255.192. And for the gateway, I'm going to type in 192.168.1.62. Yes? So my last router that I'm going to configure is going to be router 2. And I'm going to configure the fast Ethernet side, and then I'm going to configure these two. After I get done configuring these LANs, I'm going to go back and finish off my WANs. Okay? So let me click on R2, router 2, go to config. I'm going to click on fast Ethernet 0/0. I'm going to click on on. I'm going to type in 192.168.1.what. Now this router represents subnet 2, correct? What's the last usable address for subnet 2? The first address is .96. That's the network address for subnet 2. And it has to handle what? 16 hosts? So if I start at 96 and I add 16, I'm going to get 112. But 112 is the network address for the next subnet. 111 is going to be the broadcast address. So the last usable is going to be 110. Correct? You guys should have these written down. Document those. So this is going to be 110. Subnet mask of what? 255.255.255. Remember, I need 16 host addresses for the subnet. So that gives me 240 for my subnet mask because I have to leave 4 bits behind or over for my host. Close out of that. I'm going to click on PC4. Go to the desktop. I'm going to configure this one to be 192.168.1. Well, the network address for subnet 2 is .96, so the first usable address is going to be .97. Click on subnet mask. I need to put in the 240. Make sure that all my devices on the same network have the same subnet mask. For the gateway, I need to put in what I just got done doing, which is 192.168.1.110. I'm going to go to PC2. Go to the desktop, click on IP config, type in 192.168.1. Well, the last one I used was 97, so this one I'm going to use 98. Subnet mask, I'm going to type in 255.255.255.240. For gateway, I'm going to type in 192.168.1.110. Now my LANs are established. At this moment, I would test by pinging each end device on their own local network to make sure that they're communicating with each other. But in the interest of saving time, I'm going to come down here and configure the WAN between R2 and R1 and the WAN between R0 and R2. This is subnet 3, this is subnet 4, and this is subnet 5. So I'm going to click on R0. I'm going to go to config tab and click on serial 0/0/0. I'm going to turn on this interface. This is my serial 0/0/0, so it's the DCE for this network. So I'm going to leave the clock rate at 2 million. I'm going to come down here where it says IP address, and I'm going to click on 192.168.1. Well, this is subnet 3. Subnet 3's network address is 112. So the first usable is going to be 113. I'm going to click on my subnet mask, and it's going to try to guess 224. If I left this in here, I'd get overlapping problem. So I need to put in 252 because I'm dealing with a WAN connection, and all I need is 4 total addresses. And I'm going to close out of this. Now I'm going to go to R2. Click on serial 0/0/1 because that was the interface I used to connect to R0. I'm going to turn this one on. Because this is serial 1, I'm going to turn off the clock rate because serial 0 on the other router is setting the pulse. I'm going to go to the IP address, and I'm going to type in 192.168.1.114 because that's the last usable address, and I only have 2 to pick from. I used 113, so the last and the only is 114. I'm going to click on this subnet mask. It should try to guess it and guessed wrong. So I'm going to put in 252 at the end, so 255.255.255.252. I'm going to close out of that one. And then now I'm going to go to R1. Sorry, I should probably configured the serial 0/0 while I was at it. So let me go back to R2, go to the config tab, go to the 0/0/0. This one represents subnet 4, right? This was the one that's used to connect R2 to R3. R2 to R1, sorry about that. So let me turn this on. It is a 0 interface. I made my serial 0s my DCE, so I'm going to leave the clock rate alone. And I'm going to make this IP address what? This is subnet 4. So I'm going to type in 192.168.1. According to my chart, subnet 4's network address is 116. So what's my first usable address if subnet 4's network address is 116? 117? Now I'm going to click on my subnet mask, and I'm going to replace the 240 at the end with 252. Your computer might have guessed differently, but just make sure it's 255.255.255.252. Now I'm going to close out of this and go to R1, router 1. What interface am I going to configure now that I'm on R1? What interface on R1 is used to connect to R2? It's going to be serial 0/0/1. So let me click on that. Let me turn it on. I'm going to disable the clock rate because the other interface is doing that. And what IP address am I going to use for this one? I used 117 on my last interface for this network. So I'm going to use 118, 118. And I'm going to change the subnet mask so it's 252. I'm going to close out of this. All my devices and all my interfaces are properly configured. I will not have end-to-end delivered from PC2 to PC0 because I don't have static routes set up. The goal of this exercise was to show you guys why it's important to document the addresses. To also show you how to use the appropriate addresses in the appropriate locations. That's really the challenge. And in fact, in tomorrow's class, we're going to go over how to troubleshoot some addresses before I get into Chapter 7. All right? The video should be posted. You guys should have access to it tomorrow. Yesterday's lecture is already posted. Check Blackboard or check my YouTube channel to get to it. You guys want to try to watch them and stay up on them. Most of your job as a network administrator is troubleshooting and configuring. It's very seldom are you creating new networks. Okay? Having these skills are very critical. I will see you guys tomorrow. Make sure you guys are reading Chapter 7.